Welcome back to a live reading of The Effigy of Love, as written by Tony Sjöblom and read by Juho Hankela. This is Chapter 4, What Eyes Cannot See. Though years of striding along the same secret path had made his movements automatic by this point, the newly found eagerness and longing inside of him made him move with unparalleled speed. His heart beat faster and faster by the minute as his feet flew over the slithering path, a scar in the forest he had carved out with his heavy steps during nearly 12 years of regular visits to the pond. Eyes trained on the guiding light ahead, he shuffled easily past familiar trees and bushes, gracefully jumped over rocks and roots. Without even realizing it, he found himself at the glade, sweat beading his brow, heart beating through his damp clothes, and eyes scanning the surrounding trees in a desperate search for her. "I made it! I'm back!" Hendrik cried, panting as he circled the pond. Reaching the great oak where he had first seen her, he stopped. The moment was at hand, and he felt his whole being grow impossibly hot. Struggling to even open his mouth, he eventually managed to stutter. "Hello? Are you there? It is I, Hendrik." No reply. He started circling the tree slowly and carefully so as to not scare her, yet found not a single trace of anything nor anyone. "Please, there's no need to hide." Hendrik felt the fluttering feeling in his stomach die down. "I mean you no harm. Quite the contrary, I wish to see you again. Talk to you." The wind had died down, and it felt as if the whole forest had grown silent, wary. "I'm positive that I saw you earlier." Hendrik broke the silence as he returned to the rock he usually sat on. He ran his fingers over its rough yet smooth surface and said, Not only a few weeks ago, but just before I arrived, I followed your light here, rushing as I did. You need not fear me, please. I can still feel you out there. Somewhere. Step out and meet me. I have longed for a chance to see you and talk to you more than you could ever imagine." He looked from tree to tree, over every bush and moss-covered rock, but there was no sign of anyone, not gold nor green. In the distance, the droning sound of the bell tore apart the silence of the forest, each toll sending a knife-sharp feeling into his guts. 11 already. The night was already falling. Far too much time had been spent only looking at her, but he couldn't stop. Not now, when he had finally gotten his chance. Not when he had already felt her presence earlier. So why couldn't he find her? Neither time nor God was on his side that night. As the sky ultimately turned from a bruised grey into deep black, Hendrik had no choice but to give up. The bell would toll for the last time soon, and he could not afford getting into trouble again. Thus he left with quick and heavy steps. Exhausted beyond his human limits from the frantic searching and disappointment souring his mind, he returned to Brightford with all of his questions still unanswered, and even more longing in his heart. Standing in the shadow of the castle in front of him, he felt ashamed. Ashamed of having made a fool out of himself, having ran like a headless chicken deep in the forest, and ashamed of having to return to that dark prison of his, having seen but a glimpse of her. Hendrik turned toward the forest one last time and sighed. Though hope within him said otherwise, he knew there was not a chance in the world someone like her would be out in the forest this late and all alone. It was ridiculous to even think as much. No. Hendrik clenched his jaw and took a deep breath, reining in his careering mind. The hope growing deep within him didn't agree with his mind. You see, his heart had other plans. And no matter what the mind might think or wonder, there were certain things only the heart could perceive and understand. Hendrik put his hand to his chest as he scanned the black void that was the forest. This thing inside of him that had been growing for the last 2 weeks, he would hang on to. Until we meet again, and longer still after that. The longing burned again inside of him. A fire that shadowed even the mighty inferno he kept under lock and key, making him see clearly what mattered. Indeed, he might not have seen her tonight, but he had felt her, and this was enough. Even the smallest glimpse would suffice, for in truth it was all he had wished for. Someone, fate, God, had granted him this boon when he saw the shimmer of gold and green that drew him closer, and he would not be ungrateful for it, no matter how much more he craved. Good night, captor of my heart. May my words reach you wherever you may rest, Endrik whispered before stepping out of the black forest. He threw a glance up the rampart. Luck was once more on Endrik's side. The light of that same single torch swayed against the night sky, shadowed by Tanner, the ever-drowsy guard, making his job of scampering over the rocks in the ford that much easier and safer. Though he didn't think that the guards would shoot someone simply for traversing the ford, he wasn't in the mood to test his hypotheses right now. Not before long, Endrik was back in his drawing room and slumped into his wide leather chair by the window. The fire in the hearth crackled next to him, a soothing white noise that made his mind drift away yet again. 100 questions swam in his weary mind as he watched his reflection in the window pane, but not a single answer was found, not without nor within. The bell struck 12, but not even that droning, horrible sound of grey could dissolve his reveries as he sat there, safe and sound, conjuring up vivid imaginations that would fuel his ever-growing hope. A dozen heartbeats later, Myrtle showed up to take care of her last duties for the day. Sensing her young master was deep in contemplation, she silently put down the silver tray, puffed his pillows, stacked tomorrow's clothes on the chair in his bedchamber, and made a swift exit. Standing by the door, she took one last look at the boy, her old eyes perceiving more than she would ever admit, and smiled as she slipped out of the room. As the clattering of the door rings died out, Endrik finally sighed as he wistfully watched his lone reflection. The fire dancing in his eyes was bright, but he had the wrong color, a sour reminder of her twin, green stars he so longed for. Disappointed, exhausted, and sweaty like a farmer, Endrik headed to his bedchamber. Hand on his heart, he stared at the ceiling and hoped to see her in his dreams.